Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the coziest corner of the internet, where we whisper sweet nothings about history to lull you into the deepest, most dream-filled slumber. Tonight, we're not venturing into sun-drenched meadows or feasting in grand halls. Oh no, tonight we're diving headfirst into the medieval winter. And let me tell you, it's less winter wonderland and more winter wonder how they survived that. The frosty embrace of yesteryear. Forget those romantic notions of roaring fires and tankards of ale. We're talking smoke-filled huts, frozen earth, and the kind of silence that makes you wonder if the world simply forgot to make noise. This is winter, medieval style. No glory, no shining armour, just ordinary folks trying their best not to become human icicles for months on end. If the thought of slow, grounded history helps you drift off, feel free to give this video a gentle tap on the like button and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you that sweet, sweet peace. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're snuggled up and what time it is for you. There's something strangely comforting about knowing who else is out there, quietly battling insomnia with tales of frozen peasants. So, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for that perfect soft hum of white noise, wrap yourself in something warm, ideally something that doesn't smell vaguely of wet sheep, unless that's your vibe, no judgment here. And let's begin our journey into a season that didn't just test people, it tried to end them with extreme prejudice. Winter's grand entrance. Spoiler, it's not grand. You don't need a fancy calendar to know when winter's knocking. You feel it in your bones first, naturally. They stiffen up like yesterday's forgotten bread. Then you see it in the sky, which shifts from a cheerful blue to a sort of reluctant, grumbling grey. And finally the animals start looking at you with quiet suspicion, as if they know a secret you don't. Spoiler alert, they usually do, and it usually involves extreme discomfort. Autumn, bless its leafy heart, doesn't just end with a flourish. It retreats, slowly, like a house guest who's overstayed their welcome but is too polite to just up and leave. Leaves fall, sure, but it's more than that. It's the way the wind changes its tune, slipping through every gap in your cozy-ish cottage, exploring the place like an uninvited chilly detective. It pokes around, finds where the warmth lives, and then, with a dramatic flourish, evicts it. The chickens grow quieter, their clucks turning into resigned murmurs. The dog, usually a valiant guardian against rogue breezes, stops barking at the wind and starts listening to it instead, a look of profound canine worry on its face. That's how you know. The sun, when it bothers to show up at all, feels thin, like it's forgotten how to be warm, and everyone walks just a tiny bit faster, not because they're in a hurry, but because standing still now just hurts more. There's no grand announcement, no majestic snowstorm with trumpets blaring. Winter arrives like debt, quietly, unexpectedly, and with a great deal of unavoidable consequence. The art of denial and other pre-winter rituals. The first task, always, is denial. You pretend the cold is temporary, a mere chill, nothing more. You wear that same tunic you rocked in October, but now with a cloak that's more holes than fabric. You tell yourself, I'll mend it later. You won't. Not because you're lazy, mind you, but because the needle's bent, the threads ran out 3 weeks ago, and your fingers are already too numb to hold either. We modern folks talk a lot about preparation for winter, as if we're always ready for anything. But let's be honest, most winters, medieval or otherwise, arrive when we're still not quite finished with autumn. There's always that one corner of the roof you meant to fix, or that last pile of wood you swore you'd chop. Always something left in the garden that didn't get dried, salted, or stored in time. Still, you do what you can. You stuff straw into the gaps in the walls. You drape cloth over the doorway, which does absolutely nothing but makes you feel slightly better. You rearrange the beds so everyone sleeps a little closer to the hearth. Even Uncle Gain, who smells vaguely of sheep and talks in his sleep about forgotten debts and the time he wrestled a particularly stubborn turnip. You don't light fires all day. That's a luxury reserved for the truly reckless. Wood is for evenings, for cooking, and for that glorious hour or so when everyone pretends to be cheerful before the deep, dark reality sets in. The rest of the time, you rely on movement, endless layers, and the reluctant heat of several squirming siblings pressed together under one scratchy blanket. The animals sense it too. They linger longer near the shelter, their usually bustling energy replaced by a quiet, shared anxiety. The chickens huddle, looking like feathered, fluffy philosophers contemplating the meaning of cold. The pigs go eerily quiet, which, if you know anything about pigs, is deeply unsettling. The cows, bless their bovine hearts, grow more irritable, which is to say they remain exactly the same. Outside, the ground turns to iron, then to something worse. Treacherous, half-frozen ruts that twist ankles and greedily swallow boots. Water in the bucket develops a stubborn skin of ice. You break it each morning with a ladle, muttering soft curses as the cold bites at your hands. And the sky just hangs there, low, grey, expectant, like it's waiting for something big to happen. You squint at it, as if you might read it like a book, as if clouds carry secret messages. They don't. But they do mean you won't see the sun again for several weeks. In town, people walk faster, their steps echoing on the frozen cobblestones. They speak in shorter sentences, their words clipped by the cold. Jokes dry up like forgotten puddles. No one's really in the mood. Even the church sermons get a little darker, the priest reminding you that cold weather is just God's gentle way of encouraging humility. You wonder if God might consider a slightly warmer lesson plan next time. And then, finally one morning, it happens. Snow. Not a blizzard, not yet. Just a dusting, like flowers spilled across the fields. But it changes everything. The thatch turns white, the trees stiffen into skeletal sentinels. Your breath comes out in tiny, visible clouds, and every step outside sounds like you're crunching on old parchment. And with that first snowfall comes the cold, hard realization. You're locked in now. The earth has officially closed up shop for the season. No more digging, no more planting. Nothing will grow. What you've already stored is all you've got. And if you didn't store enough, well, you'll learn just how thin stew can truly get. You start counting things differently now. Not in days, but in bundles. How many bundles of firewood are left? How many sacks of grain? How many shriveled turnips? How many eggs this week? Spoiler, not many, as the hens, much like you, prefer to huddle near the fire, contemplating their life choices. You keep yourself busy, even if nothing feels truly productive. You mend clothes, scrape pans, and stir the ashes of the hearth, hoping a warm coal is hiding underneath, clinging to life. If there's time, and there often is, you spin wool. It's not just for making cloth, it's for keeping your hands moving, your mind occupied. Too much quiet, and your thoughts start getting ideas. And trust me, you don't want your thoughts getting ideas in a medieval winter. The great indoors, a symphony of smells and shared body heat. The animals aren't just company, they're cohabitants. The warmer ones are invited inside, of course. Not all at once. There are boundaries, even in the Middle Ages, but enough to turn the house into a communal stew of smells, sounds, and shared body heat. You get used to waking up with a goat breathing on your neck. Well, used to might be a strong word, but you stop fighting it. Evenings are the absolute worst. The sun disappears too early, and the darkness arrives like it's angry about something. Candles are expensive, their precious light a fleeting luxury. Tallow lamps are smoky, leaving your eyes watering and your lungs feeling like a forgotten chimney. You sit near the fire, if there's one going, and you listen to stories, to the wind rattling the ill-fitting door, to the way the wood pops and groans as it burns. Sometimes someone, usually Old Man Fitzwilliam, gets it in his head to tell a ghost story. This always seems like a brilliant idea, until you realise you have to walk across the freezing, pitch-black yard to use the privy afterward. You run. You try not to trip. You definitely, absolutely, under no circumstances, look into the shadows. And yet, winter isn't all misery. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of bitter predictability. You know the chores, you know the limits, and there's a strange camaraderie in knowing everyone else is just as miserable as you are. You learn to find comfort in the smallest victories. Warm feet for 5 glorious minutes. A stew that tastes slightly less like despair. A day without the wind cutting through the cracks in the wall like 1,000 tiny knives. You celebrate quietly because the moment you laugh too loud, someone will inevitably remind you, "We've only just begun, you fool." A glimpse into the Little Ice Age. Warning, it gets dark. Historically, we peasants didn't fare too well in medieval winters. The Little Ice Age, starting around the 14th century, brought harsher, longer winters across Europe. Rivers froze solid for months on end, turning into impromptu marketplaces where people shopped on the ice until the ice decided otherwise. In particularly bad years, like the truly dreadful period from 1315 to 1317, incessant rain ruined crops for seasons. It wasn't just cold, it was famine. Up to 30 million people were affected, and when there's no food, people get imaginative. Cannibalism was whispered about, infanticide too. Not exactly dinner table conversation, but then again, we didn't always have dinner. But that's the thing about winter. It's not just about enduring the cold, it's about enduring each other. A family of 6, 3 goats, 2 chickens, and a bucket of salted fish, all sharing 20 square feet of living space. That, my friends, is a social experiment with no exit strategy. You hear every cough, every complaint, every unfortunate digestive development. Privacy becomes a mythical creature. Modesty goes out with the sunlight. You do your best not to argue, not out of patience, but because arguing stirs up the air and lets in more cold. And so, you settle in. You shrink your world down to a few feet around the fire. You learn the precise weight of every blanket, the exact creak of every board, the unchanging, monotonous rhythm of the weather. Days shorten, nights lengthen, and time starts to dissolve into a sort of frozen soup. You're not exactly living, you're enduring. And eventually, you stop asking how long winter will last. You just wake up each day and focus on surviving that one. If you're lucky, the firewood holds out. If you're very, very lucky, the roof does too. Because in a medieval winter, the cold doesn't knock. It lets itself in and stays a while. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. The epic saga of firewood, a peasant's never-ending quest. Winter doesn't just try to kill you with cold. Oh no. It tries to kill you with chores. And at the very top of that frozen to-do list, wood. Endless amounts of it. You don't just need a few logs for ambiance, dear listener. You need firewood like your life depends on it. Because quite frankly, it does. Everything revolves around fire. It cooks your meagre food, warms your shivering bones, dries your perpetually damp socks, scares off rats the size of small dogs and makes your house only mostly uninhabitable. Without it, you're not a peasant, you're a popsicle with taxes. But fire doesn't magically appear, unfortunately. It takes wood. Lots of it. Cut, carried, chopped, stacked, and cursed out. Gathering firewood is the medieval equivalent of having a second full-time job, except this one pays exclusively in back pain and frostbite. There's no chainsaw, no gas-powered anything, just an axe that's been in the family so long you're not sure if it's a tool or an ancient heirloom. The handle's cracked, the blade is blunt, but it's still better than using your hands, which, let's face it, you probably will anyway once the axe gets stuck in the 3rd log. You start in autumn, of course. Everyone says that. Start early, except there's never enough time. The harvest runs late. Your neighbour borrowed your axe and you suspect he plans to keep it. And you sprained your ankle trying to outrun an angry goose. So here you are in December, swinging dull steel at a tree like it personally insulted your mother, praying it falls in the right direction. And trees, being the stubborn things they are, do not cooperate. They're heavy, unpredictable, and covered in a fresh layer of snow that gets down your shirt. You cut one down, only to realise you still have to chop it, carry it, and stack it. Repeat 50 times. If you're lucky, your back just hurts. If you're not, the tree lands on you, and you become a cautionary tale whispered by the hearth. Once the wood is chopped, it needs to dry. That takes months, so naturally, you burn it wet, which means it smokes, hisses, and barely burns at all. Congratulations, you've just turned your home into a tepid, smoky nightmare. Hope you weren't planning to breathe properly this winter. The rich, of course, have options. They hire people. They send servants into the woods while they sip mulled wine in front of a roaring, magnificent hearth. You are the servant, and your hearth is mostly a pile of wet twigs trying their very best. Legally, you're not even allowed to gather wood in some places. Forests belong to lords, and if you're caught collecting kindling on noble land, the punishment ranges from fines to beatings to, occasionally, being made an example of for picking up sticks. Yes, really. That's why many peasants turn to alternatives, things like peat, dried animal dung, or bundles of brush. These technically burn, in the same way that technically soup counts as a meal. Peat gives off heat, but it also gives off a smell like wet ashes and profound regret. Dung burns surprisingly well, but let's not pretend anyone is truly happy about gathering frozen cow patties with their numb hands, then pretending they're not inhaling memories of last summer's pasture. The good news? It's free. The bad news? Your cottage now smells like a campfire held inside a barn. Stacking firewood is an art form. Too tight, and it moulds. Too loose, and it falls over and breaks your toe. So you build a neat, precariously balanced pile against the wall of your house, wrap it with whatever canvas you can steal from your cousin, and hope it doesn't collapse under the weight of the snow. Spoiler, it will. And you never have enough. That's the golden rule. Doesn't matter how much wood you cut, it's never enough. By February, you're down to burning fence posts, old furniture, or anything that vaguely resembles timber. There's no sentimentality. If it catches fire, it's fuel. You dream of firewood. You count logs instead of sheep. You have actual yelling arguments over who burned the good stick too early. You ration embers. You hoard coals like they're precious jewels. And if you manage to find a particularly dry branch under the snow, you bring it home, like a war trophy. The Great Indoors Part 2. Sleeping Arrangements and Social Experiments. Sleeping in winter is a dangerous gamble. If the fire dies out, the temperature inside drops to a hope-you-wrote-a-will level. You tuck in close, under layers of blankets, furs, and other humans. Not because you particularly like them, but because survival absolutely trumps personal space. In some homes, livestock sleep inside too. Not out of kindness, dear listener, but out of necessity. Chickens provide eggs and ambient warmth. Pigs are basically radiators with hooves. Cows are like giant, mooing space heaters. It's not cozy, it's crowded, noisy, and smells vaguely like a petting zoo that collapsed into a soup kitchen. But it's marginally better than freezing to death. Historically, peasants didn't just rely on personal effort. Communities often worked together to chop and haul wood. It was less about bonding and more about shared suffering. Everyone had blisters. Everyone was freezing. Everyone was equally miserable, which, in a twisted way, made it slightly easier to endure. In some regions, people used wood-saving tricks. Clay ovens were shared. Communal fires were maintained all day. You'd take turns baking bread in the village oven, all while pretending not to notice how suspiciously warm Agnes's house always seemed to be. Women and children gathered kindling. Not because it was easier, but because that's just how the labour got divided. If you were small and had fingers, you were sent to the woods with a basket, and told, quite firmly, not to come back empty. What you returned with might have been twigs, it might have been pine cones. Either way, you contributed. And then there's the chopping itself, a deeply medieval kind of misery. Your gloves, if you even have them, are soaked through in minutes. Your fingers go numb. The axe slips. The wood splits wrong. Something sharp hits your shin. You yell. Not because it helps, but because that's all you've got left. By midwinter, the ground's too hard to chop into. Your hands have more splinters than skin, and you still haven't figured out where half your woodpile disappeared to. Spoiler alert, your neighbour borrowed it again. And yet, you keep going. Because fire is non-negotiable. It's warmth. It's food. It's the difference between making it to spring or becoming the reason your cottage smells even worse. When you sit by the fire at night, tired, sore, and lightly smoked, you feel something like peace. Not comfort, mind you, just the absence of immediate doom, which in the Middle Ages is as close to bliss as you're ever going to get. The long freeze and the whispers of survival. Of course, some winters are worse than others. You remember the bad ones by name. The winter of '43 when the roof collapsed, or the long freeze when the river turned to stone and everyone tried ice skating in wooden shoes. It did not end well. Some didn't make it. A few froze, a few just left and never came back, their stories fading into the biting wind. You stop asking questions after a while. The firewood dwindles, the wind whistles through the cracks. You find yourself eyeing your furniture a little differently. That wonky stool you never liked suddenly looks remarkably flammable. Sentiment gives way to survival. If it burns, it's valuable. Eventually the thaw comes. The snow retreats like a tired thief, leaving behind a soggy, muddy mess. The mud returns. Your boots vanish somewhere in it. But you made it. You survived another medieval winter without running out of wood, without freezing to death, and without strangling your cousin for stealing your best log. That, my dear listeners, is the victory. No medals, no parade, just frostbitten fingers, the permanent smell of smoke clinging to your clothes, and the deeply satisfying knowledge that you're not a popsicle. Not this year, anyway. And the next morning, you do it all over again, because even as spring edges closer, the cold lingers, the chores never stop, and the fire, that fickle, flickering, tiny god, always wants more wood, more sweat, more of you. And you give it, because in the end it's not about comfort, it's about survival, one splinter at a time. And tomorrow, same routine. Chop, stack, burn, freeze, repeat. You don't beat winter, you survive it. And if you're lucky, next year's axe won't break before your spirit does. Because in the end, winter doesn't care how tired you are. The logs won't chop themselves. The fire won't feed itself. And warmth, that rare, fleeting thing, has to be earned every single day. The Hunger Games, Medieval Edition. You don't need a calendar to know it's winter, dear listeners. Your stomach tells you first, loudly, repeatedly. It's not hunger in the modern sense, that gentle rumble that reminds you to check the fridge. It's deeper, angrier, the kind of emptiness that makes you stare at tree bark and wonder, could I stew that? Food in a medieval winter is like firewood, always running out, never easy to get, and guaranteed to cause arguments. You don't plan meals, you ration them, you stretch them, you look at 3 shriveled turnips and, with a brave face, call it a feast. You start with what you've stored, grains, mostly barley, rye, oats. Wheat if you're rich or particularly adept at stealing from someone who is. You keep them in sacks, barrels, or anything that theoretically keeps out rats. Spoiler, nothing keeps out rats. They're like furry, 4-legged tax collectors with very sharp teeth. Most of your meals revolve around pottage, the medieval mystery stew. It's not so much a recipe as a lifelong experiment. You throw in whatever's edible and hope it doesn't kill you. Root vegetables, dried beans, wilted greens, maybe a strip of dried pork if you've got royal connections or a very generous neighbour. It simmers for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are just added to the pot. Old ones never quite leave. It tastes vaguely like boiled earth with a hint of onion and profound regret. You eat it anyway, every day, twice a day if you're lucky, not because you like it, but because it's there. And in winter, that's enough. Meat is a rare, almost mythical creature. You don't have a freezer. You don't even have a cold cellar, just a slightly less awful corner of the cottage. If you did slaughter something in the fall, a pig, a goat, your neighbour's least favourite chicken, you salt it, smoke it, dry it, and then hide it from everyone in the house, especially the kids. Kids, bless their growing appetites, will eat anything, including raw bacon and the string you tied it with. Sometimes you fish if the river isn't frozen, if the ice isn't too thick, and if you haven't already burned your fishing rod for kindling. Ice fishing is a thing, just not a fun thing. You chip away at a hole in the ice while your toes slowly lose sensation. Then you sit, wait, and contemplate how your life became a series of increasingly stupid decisions. If you're near the sea, you might dry some herring or smoke eel. It's nutritious, long-lasting, and tastes exactly how it sounds. If you're not near water, you rely on whatever your neighbours didn't guard well enough. Bread is essential, but it's also a gamble. Made from whatever flour you've got, rye, barley, sometimes lentils, and often padded out with filler. Sawdust? Yes. Ground acorns? Maybe. Bark on a really bad year. Bread isn't soft and fluffy. It's a blunt object, something between food and a medieval defence weapon. And sometimes the bread fights back. In damp storage, Rye can grow a fungus called ergot, a delightful little microbe that causes hallucinations, convulsions, and occasionally death. You don't know this, of course. All you know is that the bread makes you see colours, scream at clouds, and possibly become a religious visionary or a witch, depending on who's watching. Dairy helps if you have animals that haven't frozen, wandered off, or been eaten. Milk spoils quickly, so you turn it into butter or cheese. The cheese is hard, salty, and vaguely threatening. Butter is a luxury. You keep it wrapped in cloth hidden under your bed like it's gold, because in winter it basically is. Eggs? Not likely. Chickens slow down in the cold. They're too busy trying not to die. You might get one a week, maybe two if you speak nicely to the hens and threaten the rooster. That egg goes straight into the pottage, or you stare at it long enough to get full from imagination alone. Fresh fruits and vegetables. Oh, that's adorable. No apples, no greens. Maybe a dried plum from last August, if it didn't rot or become home to a particularly persistent worm. Most of your vitamin C comes from sour cabbage or fermented turnip, lovingly described as crunchy disappointment in vinegar, that keeps scurvy away, but also most of your friends. The fine art of preservation and why nothing is wasted. Preservation is everything. You salt, smoke, pickle, and dry anything that once moved, grew, or was near something that did. You make jams from berries if you manage to find them, and didn't eat them all in a sugar-starved frenzy last summer. You hang herbs from the ceiling until they dry out, and drop into the soup one by one like leafy confetti. Nothing is wasted. Bones are boiled twice. The fat is saved. Even the ashes from the fire end up in soap or are used to scrub pots. If someone throws away food, you question their sanity. Or you marry them, because clearly they're wealthy enough to waste things. And then there's hunger itself. Not mild hunger, not I skipped lunch hunger, but the kind that makes you feel your stomach rubbing against your spine. The kind that makes you chew slowly, not for flavour, but to make it last. Hunger is a full-time presence in winter. It sits with you, watches you cook, comments on your portions, judges your neighbour's squirrel stew, and then whispers, "Actually, that looks all right." There's a rhythm to it. You wake up hungry, you go to bed still hungry, you learn to live with the gnawing feeling, like a tiny mouse chewing inside your belly. Eventually you stop noticing, until you smell stew from a neighbour's hut, and immediately consider selling a sibling. Even the better-off peasants don't eat well. They just eat slightly more of the same bland, mealy disappointment. Occasionally, someone manages a real treat. Honeycomb, a few fresh apple slices, a slice of salted beef the size of a coin. It's a celebration, not for the flavour, but for the stark reminder that life isn't always awful. The great famine and the grim realities. And then come the lean years, the bad harvests, the crop failures. You remember the winter of 1316, or at least the stories. Heavy rains drowned the fields. Rot set in. Grain yields collapsed. Livestock starved. Entire villages went hungry. They call it the Great Famine, not for dramatic flair, but because it really was that bad. Some people ate roots, some ate moss. Some, well, let's just say medieval cookbooks don't list stewed shoe leather for nothing. Monks kept records, bless them. They wrote about entire families vanishing, about parents choosing which child got the last crust, about people found dead in snowdrifts, clutching turnips like precious treasure. It's not folklore, it's the forgotten, chilling footnotes of history. And when you do find food, the fire's often gone out, so you eat cold stew by flickering candlelight, huddled under a fur that still smells vaguely like the animal it came from. And you're grateful, because at least it's food. At least you get to chew something that isn't your own lip. Meals are short, the hunger is long. You scrape your bowl clean, not out of manners, but because you need every crumb. You lick your fingers, you scrape the pot. You consider eating the pot, then remember it's your only one. Your body changes, you move slower, you lose weight. You don't call it dieting, you call it still alive. And yet, you keep going, because hunger is a fact, not a crisis. You don't expect to feel full, you just hope not to feel worse. That's winter, not a battle, but a constant grinding negotiation between you, your pantry, and the number of meals until April. There's no holiday feast unless you're incredibly lucky or very well connected. Maybe you save a single sausage for Christmas. Maybe a neighbour shares a pie made with mystery meat and a whole lot of courage. You don't ask questions, you eat, you smile, and you try not to cry when it's gone in 3 bites. Even the celebration foods are practical. Spiced ale, if you can afford spices. Nutcakes, if anyone had nuts. Pies filled with dried fruits soaked in syrup and desperation. They're more ritual than indulgence, a way to remind yourself that joy exists, even if it's crusted in soot and shared with a dozen shivering, sniffling relatives. So, what did you eat in a medieval winter? Anything that wouldn't eat you first, anything you could preserve, hide, or boil until it stopped arguing. You didn't dine, you survived. Because in the end, hunger wears a wool coat. It wraps around you, it stays close, it whispers in your ear. And when spring finally arrives, the first green shoot you see, you don't admire it, you bite it. Home sweet hut, a roughly constructed sanctuary. Your home in the Middle Ages is not a refuge, dear listeners. It is not a sanctuary. It is not, by any modern standard, a building. It's more like a wooden suggestion of shelter, loosely stapled to a dirt floor and held together by good intentions. Dried mud, and the unspoken agreement that nobody sneezes too hard. Let's start with the walls. Wattle and daub if you're lucky. That's woven wooden strips covered in mud, straw, and whatever else was lying around. Cow dung, hair, the latest village gossip. You pack it all together and pray it hardens before the next storm hits. Spoiler, it doesn't. On a good day, the wind whistles through the cracks like a mournful song. On a bad day, the wind howls through like it owns the place and wants rent. There is no insulation, there is no sealant. There's just the outside and slightly less outside. Your roof is thatched, of course, which sounds quaint until you realise it's just dried plant matter arranged in a vaguely triangular shape. It leaks constantly. Rain comes in. Snow piles up like a fluffy, unwelcome guest. Birds nest in it. Mice move in and start charging rent. If you're lucky, it only partially collapses during a storm. If you're not, you wake up with your ceiling in your lap and a chicken on your face. The floor, dirt, just dirt. If it's muddy, you wait. If it's frozen, you slip. If it's dry, it turns to dust and gets into everything. Your lungs, your eyes, your pottage. You try throwing down straw to soften it, which lasts approximately 6 hours before turning into a trampled, mouldy paste that somehow smells like feet and despair. Windows? Don't be silly. Glass is for churches and very, very rich people. You have holes. If you're feeling fancy, maybe you stretch some oiled parchment over the opening. It lets in a tiny bit of light and also every single draft between now and Easter. Curtains. Number cloth is far too valuable to waste on luxuries like privacy. Doors barely latch, their hinges groaning like wounded animals. You can barricade it with a log, or if you're short on logs, because you've already burned them for heat, maybe just hope the wind isn't in a mischievous mood. Fireplaces are central, but not in a cosy modern way. There's a fire pit in the middle of the room. No chimney, just a hole in the roof. So the smoke rises slowly, filling your home with a lovely grey fog that coats your walls, your lungs, and any hope you had of clear breathing until spring. You don't smell the smoke after a while. You are the smoke. Furniture, sleeping, and the aroma of medieval life. Now, let's talk furniture. You don't have much. A wooden bench, maybe a stool or two. A table if you're living the high life. Beds are shared with your spouse, your children, and occasionally livestock. The mattress is straw stuffed into a sack, which sounds fine until you remember that straw doesn't stay fluffy. It compresses, moulds, and invites bugs to a party in your bed. Your pillow is another sack. If you're lucky, it's full of feathers. If you're not, it's just more straw, possibly slightly less crunchy. Blankets? Wool if you've got it, or furs if something nearby died recently. Most nights, you sleep in your clothes, under everything you own, hoping that body heat plus faith equals survival. And if your fire dies out overnight, you wake up frozen in your own breath cloud, questioning every single decision that led to this point. Heating the place is a constant uphill battle. You keep the fire going, sure, but heat rises, smoke rises, and unfortunately, you're sleeping on the floor, which means your toes freeze while your rafters get a lovely sauna experience. Stones around the hearth help. They absorb heat and release it slowly, but only if you have enough fuel to make them warm in the first place. You seal up cracks with moss, cloth, or mud. It doesn't work. The wind finds a way. It always finds a way. There are days when you swear the air inside is colder than the air outside, and you consider doing something about it, but your fingers are too numb to even untie your cloak. Lighting is another delight. You've got tallow candles which drip, sputter and reek of beef fat, or rush lights, reeds dipped in animal grease which burn like someone tried to weaponize a salad. The smoke from these mingles with the hearth smoke until the whole room is a low-hanging haze of medieval asthma triggers. And let's not forget the noise. Thin walls mean you hear everything. The wind, the livestock, your neighbour sneezing, your own stomach growling back at you like it's filing a formal complaint. Privacy? A myth. Solitude? Only if you walk into the forest and don't come back. Of course, it's not just people living here. Your cottage shares space with animals. Chickens nest in corners, occasionally laying an egg next to your head in the middle of the night. You say thank you and try to fall back asleep before it poops on your blanket. A goat sleeps under the table. If you've got a cow, she lives in the lean-to attached to the wall unless it's too cold, in which case she joins you in the main room. There is no such thing as indoor and outdoor. There is only not dead from the cold. This makes the house warmer slightly. It also makes it louder, messier, and smell like a barn that recently lost a bet. You sweep the floors, but the dirt just rearranges itself. The straw bedding smells like old milk. Your roof also houses guests, birds, rats, insects. The thatch is thick enough for nesting, which means come spring, you'll hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet above you at all hours. Sometimes they fall in. It's normal. You scream, the rat screams, and then you both pretend it never happened. The daily grind and the relentless pursuit of survival. Maintenance is constant. Doors crack, rafters bend, walls sag, the wind tears at the roof. You fix what you can with what you have, which is usually string, hope, and a very dull knife. You can't afford nails. You wedge things into place. You hammer wood together using a rock and a prayer. And if it's raining and the roof's leaking, you don't grab a bucket. You grab all the buckets, you position them around the house like you're trying to win a very sad game of splash chess. You learn which spots drip first. You name them. You curse them. You learn to sleep around them. It's not all doom and gloom, however. There are warm moments. The fire catches well. Someone shares a fur. A draft miraculously stops for no reason, and you convince yourself it's your superior craftsmanship. You huddle close with your family and pretend the smell is comforting. It's not, but it is familiar. Still, you endure it. Because this isn't just a pile of timber and bad smells, it's home. It's where you were born, where your children were born, and where someone probably died last week. You patch it, you sweep it, you whisper to it in winter like it's a sick relative. Just hold on a little longer. You don't compare it to a castle. You compare it to not freezing to death. And by that measure, it's doing just fine. Some wealthier peasants whitewash the walls, not for luxury, but for lice. The lime kills bugs. A fresh coat every year keeps the walls bright and the infestations mostly cosmetic. You think about doing it. You even collect the lime. But then the firewood runs out again. You hang herbs to make the air smell nicer. They dry out, crumble and fall into your soup. You eat them anyway. The taste is weird, but you tell yourself it's seasoning. It's not. And every so often you dream. You dream of a second room, of a wooden floor, of a roof that doesn't make you flinch every time a breeze picks up. You don't expect it. You just let the thoughts sit with you while you stitch another patch into the wall and listen to the rain come through the ceiling. Because in the end, your house isn't warm or dry or peaceful, but it's still standing, and in a medieval winter, that's about as close to luxury as you're ever going to get. It's dawn, or close enough. There's a faint light outside that might be the sun, or just the moon finally giving up. Either way, it's time to get up. Not because you're rested, you're not. Not because you're excited, you're definitely not. But because your life depends on getting things done before frostbite, famine, or your neighbour's goat beats you to the water source. There's no weekend. There's no me time. There's barely enough time to scrape the frost off your eyebrows. Every day is a repeat of the last. Gather, mend, feed, carry, boil, patch, repeat. Winter in the Middle Ages isn't a season. It's a marathon of misery, and you're just trying to make it to the finish line without losing too many toes. And with that thought, dear listeners, I hope you're feeling incredibly grateful for your warm beds, your well-stocked fridges and roofs that actually stay where they're supposed to. Perhaps the thought of all that medieval discomfort will help you drift off into a truly peaceful, worry-free sleep. Sweet dreams, and until next time, try not to imagine your ancestors gnawing on bark, unless that helps you sleep, of course. Whatever works.